Look guys, I know I try to start these videos off with a lighthearted humour, but there's nothing really funny about how wider games journalism has slept on Yakuza. Game reviewers are almost unwilling to try to understand the series, making me more angry than when you have a pizza party and someone always insists on getting a vegetarian option, despite the fact margarita is a perfectly good choice that everyone will eat, and who the hell is this vegetarian we're always waiting on?
I'm vegan now.
I'll kill you!
If you've ever heard about the Yakuza series, it's probably from big old weebs like me, but trust me when I say this isn't the usually sexually frustrated fanfare to come from the land of the rising sun. Side note, why was there more than one Extreme Beach Volleyball Dead or Alive game? This series is actually amazing, and it's been since its inception. Brought to us by Sega, the same company that validated the furry community with Sonic 06, Yakuza was built in a tumultuous time for the house the Hedgehog built. During the 6th console generation, Sega enforced the bar of the console wars with the tremendous failure of the Dreamcast. Couple that with Shenmue 1 and 2 having the biggest budgets of any video game at the time and not really pushing sales numbers that justified the cost, you can imagine how some of the higher ups at Sega felt.
Hey, how come all you have in here is a smiley face button and a revolver?
Well, one's in case I get sad, and the other one's in case I get really sad.
But despite their many misgivings, Sega isn't afraid to experiment and create, or in a lot of new cases, fund new IPs. Still, when Toshiro Nagoshi, a director famed for helming the Super Monkey Ball series, pitched a gritty crime drama where the player takes the role of a hardened career criminal, those at-risk Sega execs only had one thing to say to him.
Serious?
Now I could go further into detail on this, but Super Eye Patch Wolf, another Irish creator, has a much more in-depth analysis on this behind-the-scenes drama. TLDR, they let him do it, and if it didn't work, neither would Nagoshi. Not only did Yakuza perform super well in Japan, its initial European sales matched its Japanese ones, and the initial installment sold 1 million copies. Despite the first installment doing well, it didn't quite jelly with the West's peanut butter, so further installments only really had a niche following outside the land of the rising sun. So why then has Yakuza experienced a recent surge in popularity? I can think of one reason, scratch that, one particular entry that answers my question for me. You guys, Yakuza 0 is so good, it makes me want to join the Japanese mafia. On second thought, I'd like to rescind that application, please. Now, if you couldn't tell from the name Yakuza 0, it's a prequel to the rest of the series. You still play as Kazuma Kiryu, but he's not gotten the moniker of the Dragon of Dojima or his pimp-ass threads. Yet the game does an excellent job highlighting the top-tier storytelling of the series. Kiryu is familiar, but a little bit different. He's more like an outline of what it'll be as the series continues, and that's not even just narrative, there's a visual aspect to that. His infamous dragon tattoo is colourless, undecided as to what it will be. His classic grey suit, red shirt combo isn't quite there yet, but it's close. It also kicks off with a narrative involving shadowy cabals, plots to drastically shake up the Yakuza, and ultimately give the worst people in the city control of Kamurocho and a major footholding in Japan. Filled with plenty of twists, turns, betrayals, and even a little romance. It just makes for a super approachable story, but that really wasn't enough to draw in a larger crowd. Hell, my plot summary could be more or less applied to at least 3 other Yakuza games, so what made Zero so special? If you couldn't tell from the neo lights and disco dancing, the game is set in the 80s, and in 2016, that aesthetic hadn't quite run out of allure yet. Seriously, we'd gotten a long way to Blade Runner, a remake of It, and for some reason, people were still trying to convince themselves they really like Stranger Things. Now, unlike some properties which just use the 80s for the sake of it, Yakuza 0 has a narrative reason for being set in the decade. You see, in the 80s, Japan was going through an economic boom. Money is at the core of the narrative of Yakuza 0. I mean, the whole game is about securing ownership rights to a square foot patch of dirt so the Tojo clan can gain a tighter grip in Japan as a whole, and oust Kiryu's father figure from power. Those that have the most power in Yakuza are those that have the most money. Hell, it's cause of money that Majima, our second playable character, hasn't been able to return to his life as Yakuza because he's making his family too much money running a nightclub as a punishment. Also, how is that a punishment? Like, if I didn't beat up people for money and I was given a secure, high-paying job with great benefits as punishment, I'd probably be more willing to do that. Less chance of losing a finger anyhow. But the issue for our protagonists is that cash seems to be what's trapping them in their less desirable situations. Kiryu's hardship begins when when a money collection goes wrong and he's framed for murder and kicked out of the Tojo clan, just a Monday really. Majima's money-making skills may be keeping him alive, but he's living a lie and he's trapped in Sotenbori with no indication that he'll ever be allowed to return to Yakuza or even live as a free man. Also, I find it telling that neither character has ever expressed any interest in money at all in later entries. They just kind of want to live on their own terms, and this fleeting resource is preventing that. The narrative is all well and good, but it's not like they found a way to tie the story's monetary obsession into the gameplay mechanics. Wrong again, sexy person watching this video. If you were ever in question about the level design prowess of this series, look no further than Yakuza 0. I outlined the economic bubble of Japan in the 80s as it wasn't just gangsters and businessmen that had money in the 80s. Everyone did. The game takes this to a pretty extreme degree, as every random encounter and enemy defeated ends with them exploding into a pile of cash.
Sweet. Coins.
Now, money drops from random encounters ain't nothing new for video games, but I've never seen a game where money was the central design aspect. I touched on how busted the economies of video games can be in a previous video. Shameless plug! For instance, Assassin's Creed 2, way too much money is given to you for way too little to spend it on. You may get in-game currency in Overwatch, but chances are you still won't have enough for that skin you want. One day you won't be mine. Zero knows how to perfectly balance this by making money not just a single-use resource. In a more traditional sense, money is a resource used solely for buying things in games. Things like EXP are a separate resource for increasing a character's level. Zero decides to do away with the notion entirely and makes money a singular resource used for everything. I mean, it makes sense. Money is power in this world, so of course the characters can turn that cash into strength too, and it pays off hard for the game. You may think $1,000,000 yen is a lot of money, and Yakuza pushes your head into a puddle and laughs at you while your girlfriend watches. While the game may shower you with cash, it's never so much that you're left without an option of what to buy with it. Well, yes, you could buy decent armors and weapons and maybe some healing items. You'll be lacking in the stats department for Kiryu and Majima. It just creates this fantastic sense of balancing your finances without turning you into an accountant. You're constantly trying to decide where best to spend your cash. Now, you may be thinking that because of this, the game may just turn into a grind fest, but if anything, this system promotes you, the player, to seek more efficient ways to make money. For instance, as Kiryu, you get to take part in the real estate minigame, where you can earn a crap ton of cash for very little effort. The rub is that you need to invest a lump sum into buying up the businesses, hiring staff to run them, and you have a showdown with the other real estate bosses. It's a weird game, I know. Majima, on the other hand, is just given another cabaret club, because I guess he's one of those people that fails up in life. But again, there's an initial cost to all this, with hiring new staff, paying for things at the club, etc. Now, you may wonder where you get the money to do all this in the first place, but the game's side stories either pay you directly with cash or resources you can sell for a nice sum. Failing all of that, there's Mr. Shakedown. You can find this wandering brawler on the streets of both Kamurocho and Sotenbori. If you do, he'll give you all his money, as long as you introduce him to the end of a baseball bat or bench. Doing so nets you a small fortune. However, if you lose, he'll take all your money, and this can be devastating if you were saving up for a particular upgrade. This cash-based system is just so perfectly realized, and once you do start investing in Kiryu and Majima's skill trees, you'll find that the combat system, while initially fairly simple, evolves into a rather rewarding and satisfying affair. I don't know how many heat actions I did, but every time I performed one, they always felt amazing. You do not know the sheer satisfaction of hitting someone so hard with a motorcycle that it explodes apart until you've played this game. And all the major fight scenes feel like that elevator scene in Captain America or that hallway scene in Oldboy.
What make comment on top about how light game shows doesn't understand Yakuza?
You see, while recent Yakuza games have been getting a bit more mainstream appeal, and they all review really well, one thing that I think stands out in these reviews is that Yakuza games have inconsistent tones. I'd actually argue that this is a bit of a misconception on reviewers' parts. You see, Yakuza is a series of excess drama, action, intrigue. It never does anything with a half measure. So while a reviewer may see Kiryu do something like this and think it's bad, I'd argue that this is what makes the series so great. They're so unapologetically Japanese, and I think removing that or toning it down really flies in the face of the series. But even if the games weren't so drenched in Japanese culture, I'd argue in favor of the more silly aspects of Yakuza. That's because they're humanizing. We in the West seem to have this notion that if a character is this gruff, tough guy, that's all he should be. Take for instance Joel from The Last of Us. Yes, he has an objectively terrible life, and he may not have too much to be happy about, but at some point he he was just the guy who liked to hang out with his daughter, and he probably had a hobby or two he was embarrassed about. I'm not saying stories can't be grim, but when that's all they are, they're not compelling or human. They're pharmaceutical companies' wet dreams of selling you over-the-counter antidepressants. Yakuza having Kiryu act like a goofball makes so much sense to me. Yes, he's the stone-faced wall of a bruiser, but he has interests outside of bicycle destruction and manhandling. He's a talented singer, a fan of toy car racing, and a gamer himself. He may be stoic, but he's kind and he wants to see people use their talents. He's awkward, earnest, and can't say no to helping people who need it. Kiryu feels more like a Doctor Who archetype of character rather than a gangster like he should be, breezing into a stranger's life for a fleeting moment to help and ultimately changing their lives forever. And he's so much more engaging because of that. Now yeah, if you played the games for an hour or two, it may seem really weird when Kiryu is voice acting for a sex scene between two young men, or to see him answer a phone like this. But Zero again sets up the tone beautifully. We're immediately brought from a violent shakedown to this passionate karaoke music video. So if you can't tell the game is going to have a crime drama narrative but also be a little silly, well I'm sorry, but that's on you, man. I don't think this undercuts the more serious moments, and hell, it made Goro Majima, the mad dog of Shimano, into a heartbreaking character because of spoilers, but don't just take my word for it.
Hey there, I'm Jake of The Retro Perspective. And thanks very much to Kevin for inviting me on his channel. I'll take any opportunity to talk about the Yakuza series. And around the time of Yakuza 0's release, I was actually quite worried about the future of Yakuza. Yakuza 5, despite being a phenomenal game, had kind of a lackluster release and didn't even get physical copies released outside of Japan. But when Yakuza 0 came along, we just had a new console generation, and I think that the idea to take it back to the beginning of Kazuma Kiryu's story so that new fans could come in and enjoy the series as well at that point was an absolute stroke of genius. I think there's always been a large subset of gamers that have been crying out for a series like Yakuza ever since we had Shenmue on the Dreamcast and never really got the sequel that fans deserved from that. So again, it was a surprise and a frustration to me that Yakuza wasn't getting the cult following that it really deserved. That all changed with Yakuza 0. Suddenly you had Jim Sterling doing videos on Yakuza. You had Writing on Games doing video essays on Yakuza. You had my reviews, which got a couple of hundred views, I guess. So Yakuza 0 brought a whole new generation of fans into the series, but it's also great then that Yakuza 0 is actually one of the best games of the series, and such a great game in its own right. I often describe the series as the Grand Theft Auto of Japanese gaming, and as such would recommend it to almost anybody. It's great if you want to have a quick mess around and do some of the mini games or side quests, and it's also great if you want to dive deep into the characters and the story. And if you haven't played Yakuza, there is literally no better place to start than with Yakuza 0. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Thanks for that, Jake. And hey, if you guys want to check out more of his stuff, you should definitely check out his channel, The Retro Perspective. It's incredible. And also, he makes his own music. I'm multi-talented.
Cause you're lazy?
Oh yeah. And you can check out his music on Moonfleet Bandcamp, link below. Don't forget, guys, to like or dislike depending on your mood. Hit me with the subscription, hit me with a brick if you see me on the streets, and don't forget to check out more of my stuff. Until then, I'll see you later, and keep it sleazy, sluts.